Hello, gang. Hey, hey. How's it going, gang? Let me know how audio and visuals going. Can you hear me? Can you see me all right? Hi, Christina. Okay, great. So, today will be crits only. And I have a bunch to look at today, so we should get started pretty quick here. What I'm going to do is just read through the descriptions so you can see kind of what the questions or the big points were, and then we'll look at how we can improve our paintings here. I wanted to give you guys notice that officially, as of this month, from now on for crits, you'll need to be at the Student Plus tier because this is just so much more stuff. Um, yeah, we'll discuss in Discord and we'll get that sorted out. But I just want to let you know that that is going to be the plan going on into the future. Obviously not applicable this time. Anyway, so here we go. This is Tulio here on my Patreon. He's done it looks like a magic card inspired piece. Let's read it. This art was a fan art for a portfolio piece based on the card Senate Guild. Tried to improve points doing this art with dynamic camera angle, metal render, atmospheric perspective. Biggest difficulty being cold color mixing with the background for harmony. Front plane didn't work. Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, let's take a look in Photoshop and see what we can do about this. Hi, Irina. How y'all doing today? All right. Make a new layer. Looking at this is a nice solid piece. Sorry. Backstory, I just had to go run looking for my dog. She got out and was wandering around in the yard. She can get into some trouble on her own. Anyway, yeah, nice work. Lots of different materials. Very cool perspective. Let's take a look at it without color and see. Yeah, nice. This is a really cool read. It's very dynamic. Your goal there was definitely attained. So this I would say is definitely in the in terms of feel and narrative, this is right on point with a magic card. So you're doing it right. Um, Big things jumping out. You're right. The contrast between your complementary colors here is too extreme. So a good rule to live by if you're trying to do a complement style, contrasting, interesting image like this is to make sure that one of your hues is less dominant. Right now we have two dominant hues clashing against each other, and they're occupying uh, an interestingly similar amount of space just in terms of volume. So I think the best thing here would be to just choose one to be the dominant and let the other one kind of fall back. And I think the dominant here should be your foreground. So let's set this to color. Hi, Serge. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to color pick a gray, and that's too much. Let's do an orange gray. Even more gray. Now, the idea behind this, we can approach this with from a logic background too, just in that these surfaces down here, probably because of atmosphere between us and the ground plane, can have a little bit of desaturation going on like you would have naturally with atmosphere. So there's not just atmosphere between the figure and the light source, the sun. There's atmosphere everywhere in all directions. And in all directions, that atmosphere acts as a sort of an occlusion agent. It's blocking light. So it's all those little particulates in space. And it works from every direction. So vertically here, we're just going to push back just a little bit on that. And what that does is it helps the blues stand out more where they're at. There's still a heavy dose of complement, but it's a little bit more smoothed out. Turn it off, turn it on. And the next big one that I would say is your lighting for the figure from that background sun is a little bit off. This is a materials thing, so the specular is not falling in the right spot. So let's go ahead and knock that back a little bit. Your instincts are totally right here with this core shadow. But by pushing that back in space, not in space, sorry, pushing that back behind the pauldron a little bit more, that's doing two things. It's making the light a little bit more accurate because the sun is low and it's near the horizon, and she's above the horizon now. She's up in the air, so the light should actually be coming from a little bit below. It does that. It makes it light accurate, but it also gives more breathing room for your blues, the cools here. Yeah, you ran into a very interesting difficulty that happens almost exclusively with sci-fi and fantasy, and that's where you have light sources like this, where you want to have light that's coming up towards the face, and then you also have this cool emissive light source from the eyes. And how do you choose which one is the one to give, the dominance to? I think you chose correctly, using the light from the eyes just as like a hot spot, not letting it light too much, and then blooming from there. You kind of got to hide out, not have to deal with the lights to either side. In that same vein, you've got some parts here where the light really shouldn't be getting picked up. If these are down low, that the bridge of the nose, you're not going to see so much. Maybe the bottom is fine, bottom of the lips, but watch your lighting direction to help with this a little bit more. Also, thinking about this, you got the cast shadow here. I would bring it up even further. And it may seem at first unusual to kind of break up the face with these more abstract shapes, but because the face reads, really easily, no matter what, like it's kind of the first thing we see, there can be some pretty good forgiveness given there. All right, let's see. When you're working on magic cards, this is a big one. They will ask you regularly not to include actual runes or religious iconography of any kind. You can't. You can reference feel. You can reference style, shape, rhythms, but you cannot actually use real runes. I think these are real. So you gotta be extra careful about that stuff. Obviously, this isn't for a magic card. I know that, but because it's coming from doing a magic fan art, might be something to think about. I don't know if these are real or not, but just a heads up. I'd say another thing that's happening here is your ellipses are a bit off. When you're doing your ellipse at an angle, you don't just squish the ellipse, you have to actually stretch one side of the ellipse so that the interior ellipses will deform correctly. Let's copy this one, paste it over here. Now, if you just squish it, yeah, technically it's an ellipse, but you see that the interior and the exterior ellipses are squashed in the same degree. What you want is to imply depth and perspective, and ellipses, when they're interlaced like this, operate more like that. You're going to see diminishment on the ellipses where they pinch together on the far side, and then they're going to be a little bit wider on the nearer side. They should be equidistant at the top and bottom. Does it make sense? So ellipse here. This would be a more accurate ellipse for this perspective you've chosen. It's minor. It's a really tiny detail, but when you see it, like when people draw cars or things like that, if you don't get those ellipses right, they can look really weird. Let's delete that and get back in here. And the last thing I wanted to say, this is again that emissive light source thing, like her eyes. The hands are really blown out, and the photos in there, that noise is kind of creating a contrast and visual interest, a focal point that really, it's just drawing too much attention. I think your best bet would be to treat, instead of treating the entire palm as a light source, I would pick a point in the palm and then light the rest of the palm accordingly. So let's say your light source is in the center of the palm here. Color pick. Then all your hot spots would be facing the palm, and then as it turns away, you would have more values to work with. I don't even know if Tulio's on. Any questions, guys? Whoops. Instinct. Anytime I set down the brush, I press the save button. All good. Great, great. I'm going to leave the hair as it is and say it's actually quite good. Because the hair is all of these little strands, the light can penetrate it, and therefore it'll look like it's kind of coming around the top of the scalp a little bit more. The darks in the ponytail are probably a little bit, I don't know, there's something wrong with the ponytail, the way it's lit. I would actually just take the ponytail and put it all in more of a silhouette, and then just rim light it. And down here you've got some dark values that are way too dark compared to your foreground. Ha! Welcome, Fritz. Cool. Yeah, I think this really came out quite nice. I think you did an excellent job. It's all nitpicking that I've done. It's a solid piece in and of itself. Just, yeah, little things. Making sure that your buildings kind of feel logical. Watch your cast shadows. Lighting direction and emissive light source. Those will be the big takeaways here. And I think your materials are looking really good. So, well done. All right, let's move on to the next one. Let's see. We've got Sergio's. Another, yeah, like 3 of you guys did magic cards, huh? How cool. Okay, hi Izzy. This is my first illustration to come up. Tried to emulate an MTG illustration. Planeswalker. What can you prove upon to apply to future illustration? Well, let's close this one. Okay. Well, I'd say definitely there's going to be something to do with lighting here. There's the value control is excellent, but in terms of actually seeing what's going on, the first read is slow. And generally that's a result of lighting. So let's get rid of color and take a look at what we've got here. I think, yeah, one of the ways that we could make this pop a little bit more is to push atmosphere. Either decide that she's going to be dark on a light and the foreground is going to be dark on a light, or the other option would be, instead of silhouetting her, lighting her more strongly from the moon. That is the moon, right? Celestial bodies in Magic are pretty kooky and all over the place. Some planes have multiple moons, multiple suns, no sun. There's all sorts of different rules for them. But within the constraints of, you know, a fantasy planet, you still want to follow the kind of the rules of how that light works and how that works in space, in an image. And the moon here feels really, really soft and kind of confused. I think it's meant to be coming through clouds. Is that the case? Hi, Dan Rob. Thanks. Not really. Okay, I thought so. So that's all right. We're all learning in here together. So that's good because then that gives us a better place to work from. If you're going to be including the moon or a celestial body like the sun in your shot, honestly, just the easiest way to get around it is just to throw in a circle marquee and try and remember relative size to atmosphere, that sort of thing. Like if you want it to be a big moon, it doesn't need to be that big because we're talking about something that would be really, really close to the surface. That's more in sci-fi. I mean, obviously you can do fantasy variants on this, but I try to keep it like somewhat in the realm of reality. Your moon, if it's just being lit, actually let's do a fill. Whoops, deselect this. Okay, so within that we can go back and light the moon so that it's only being hit by one side of the sun, right? Well, the problem there is that those values, let's turn this off. See that value being 25? With your lighting here, that should probably be the brightest thing in the shot. I'm going to leave it as it is because we're going to change the lighting though. These darks that you have in the clouds, if this is open space behind the moon here, this is sky that's not being lit. There is no light in this atmosphere aside from the little sparse bit from the moon. So you're gonna need to actually darken the sky out quite a bit to justify the shadows that you have here. There is atmosphere but no clouds. Okay. That would limit what I've done just a little bit. Remember that the atmospheric effect to work, there must be light coming through it. It has to be blocking light. That's how it works. So this moon has to be real bright then to justify that, which is fine. New layer. Let's cheat. That is not correct. Let's do a screen. Oops. Color pick. All right. We'll leave that alone for now and then come to the foreground. So the lighting that you have indicates that the light source would be stronger. So this would be, to justify this light source, I'd probably make it a full moon or make it brighter so that the atmosphere isn't blocking that light, but we'll ignore that for now because you can, as we've been talking about in the last several lighting lessons, last couple of lighting lessons, narrative lighting, it's really more about telling the story that you want to tell. So that's okay. I'm not gonna belabor that any further. Let's get in here and see if we can do something about her lighting. I think you can get away with the lighting, the rim lighting that's on her. Firstly, remember that rim lighting doesn't go everywhere. Rim lighting is only on the surfaces that are perpendicular to your light source. Cast shadows. There's a lot of shadow mapping here that's not working. If that collar is going around her neck, then it's blocking her neck and her chest from the light of that sun, light of that moon, pretty significantly. You got to work on form shadows and cast shadows so that they all obey the light source. First what I'm going to do is I'm going to light her 100% from the moon, and then we'll figure out what's going on with this other light source here. I have a feeling that just 100% lighting her from the moon and getting all those form shadows working might solve some of these issues. See these lights? Where are these lights coming from? You gotta pay attention. It's when you're noodling, especially in that render phase, like these lights, uh, they're not making any sense. But when you're zoomed in and you're trying to figure things out and you're just having fun with the noodle part, it's so easy to lose track of your light sources. It's always a good idea to draw them in. I think, you know, making sure that you even if you need, when you're zoomed in, to take that thing with you, then you know which surfaces are facing the light most perpendicularly. I think it would be interesting, like this is obviously a little bit more advanced stuff. I'm jumping ahead real quick, but you do have lights on the bottom part here, which wouldn't be picking up too much light aside from the moon. It would be really cool to have the city here lit. I'm pretty sure this is meant to be kind of a fantasy city. So if you lit it kind of with a firelight in the streets and things like that and uplit the buildings, then you could justify having a warm light source on the bottom of her, which would really round out the forms. And then you wouldn't have lost edges like this side and here. It would give you a little bit of balance. So like in the last one, it was a lot of contrast of color. This one is a very analogous color scheme. And if you were to introduce just a little bit, just hints of a contrasting color, it creates vibration, it draws interest. The viewer has a harder time looking away because they're trying to figure out, you know, their brain is reacting to these interesting color relationships. I think another thing that might help is with the clouds. If you use the clouds as a framing device, a little bit better. In terms of the framing of the overall cloud shape, perfect. I think this is a really good compositional element right here. It draws us right into her face. That's excellent. What I am talking about is allowing the clouds to kind of abstract up and clump up a little bit more and be a little less feathery and cottony and soft. Get those dark values in there. And then you have more value play with the lights on her. Then you can do things like more reflected lights, more bounced lights. Just those little subtle pops of light against the dark can create edges very easy. It's super cheap way to create your edges, which will give nice delineation. So let's say we take that light source and bring it in here, just hinting at. Then those details kind of pop out a little bit, and it's not breaking value keys or anything like that. Everything's still really tight. So you can always, if you're ever struggling with kind of lost and found where you don't want lost and found, you can always play with the background just as much as you can play with the foreground. I hope that makes sense. Is there any way of solving that problem, maintaining the analogous scheme? I think I answered that question already a little bit. In terms of the color. Are you following me there, Serge? Same thing. If you have enough light that's actually bouncing on her face like that, I would definitely be adding it to these surfaces just to create, you know what, we're going to cheat and just make a screen layer. Pick a dark cool. Because I don't want to lose the text that you've written on it. but just by adding and allowing these other objects to be lit in the same way that she's being lit. They don't need to be lit as drastically. They don't even need as strong a highlights, but they do need to be lit and follow the same rules of the light that you have everywhere else. When you do that, you're seating them in the scene, and you're also using them as framing devices for her. And you did the logic. I see the logic is here. You're using them, and they're meant to kind of encompass her. They're telling us about what she's doing, but also visually, they can be used to keep us in the shot. You could play with the shapes of these things a little bit more, and I think you could probably come up with something more dynamic that maybe wraps around behind her so we can see overlap and things like that, and make sure that these shapes that are swirling around her of the scrolls kind of show us greater depths, and also kind of envelop her a little bit better. Like this shape with the clouds is great. If you were to do similar rhythms, not the same, but similar rhythms with some of these scrolls, and the way they're flapping around in the wind and letting them wrap around her, it would create a more dynamic image. Right now it's dynamic. It's totally dynamic, but you could take it further. Obviously this one needs... I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but I keep looking at the foot and thinking it should be turned in towards her. Irina, you're not wrong. I was actually going to be getting to that next. There is a problem. There's problems with the anatomy. Yes, it's a great piece. I love the mood in it. Yeah, Christina caught it too. Good. I'm so proud of y'all. All right, so this is an example of where I have created a lost edge there by virtue of the clouds that are behind it. So I'm just going to knock them back just a little bit to give that lit side of the scroll breathing room. It's still a cloud. It's still being lit by the moon. But now that scroll has dominance. It's pulled forward. And of course, we could do this with all of the scrolls. I think this is a huge missed opportunity just in terms of like sexy special effects stuff. But if you have a thin object that's in front of a light source like this, if you're not like either drawing it directly in front of the light source just to get that subsurface scattering, or at least hinting at subsurface scattering in it, you're missing out. That's easy, sexy. Easy, easy. Right? You don't want to, never want to miss an opportunity to take advantage of that, because everybody loves that shit. And then, of course, you got to show the backside so that you can see that it's lit. Right? And then you could, of course, swoop this around. By using this lasso tool here and just being kind of judicious with the values, it's giving it kind of a chunky, real, more heavy-duty shape. Having that is a result of these nice strong edges, which you're kind of missing here, and then also making sure that the value relationships surrounding them are not subtle. There's a lot of subtlety here. There's a lot here where the edges get lost. It's totally fine to have lost and found edges, but be in control of them. Make sure that they're lost because you want them to be. Make sure that they're found because you want them to be. And if it's decisive, it'll be stronger. All right, so let's get onto this foot. We have what looks like the foot is pointing downwards. So the tibia and fibula in here are, what is it? This is supinating. They're turning in this direction here at the knee, and then the ankle is turning further. And so now the foot, the heel here is being bent this way, and toes here. This, I don't think you can do this without a broken leg, to be honest. I really think that would snap. That would cause a spiral fracture in here somewhere. So it's not working right now. It's in the dark, so it's kind of, oops, I deleted a whole bunch of stuff. It's kind of obfuscated, and it's okay. It's not the end of the world, because this is your focal point. That's what people are going to see. But anybody that's paying attention or knows their anatomy is going to see that. So This is a reference issue. I think there's a couple of parts here. The elbow, a little bit with this wrist. It looks like there were two pieces of reference. There was a reference for drawing, which had a different angle than the reference for the forearm, or there may have been no reference for forearm. One of the ways that you can get this hand to work, because it looks like you're treasuring it pretty hard here, is to change the angle of insertion. So you have your elbow being kicked out a little bit, which can feel pretty natural. That's a nice way to handle that, I think. It's still tilted up a little bit, but it's a little more natural. This kind of turn in feels odd. Although I've seen people do it, so, you know, again, not the end of the world. So your foot down here we should be seeing the front end of it. If anything, we might be picking up just a little bit of the sole right here, maybe a big toe, and then the little toes would tuck under. The feet at angles are super hard, so I feel you don't feel too bad about it. It's a constant struggle. You want to have your ankle up here. Oops, it's a little too stark. Even if she's doing kind of full-on ballet toes, you still need to have the mass of the arch facing us. So I'm going to go ahead and tuck the toes just so you can see kind of the easier positioning there. Do you see what I'm saying? You need to draw, when you're thinking about feet and hands, you need to think about the simple shapes first and construct them in the perspective that fits the anatomy that's there. It's definitely hurting right there. That calf, the thigh. So everything that's happening here is, you can follow it back. The knee isn't working, the thigh isn't working, it's not sitting in the hip right. Same here. This one you could get away with it, but the problem is that the wrinkles themselves look like the knee is twisting in this direction. So you have to be careful with your wrinkles too. What you would probably do instead is have more of a flat plane where the knee is at, and then having wrinkles up on the side like that. Does all make sense? You got any other questions? Did I mention something and not touch on it? I do that a lot, especially when I'm meandering. Like I'll get caught up on something and then forget that I mentioned something else. Yeah. When you're working on your own work, or when you're observing somebody else's work and trying to figure out, how you would do it and do it differently, one of the ways that you can really test stuff is, if something on one side isn't working, double check the other side. Almost always, if there's a clear anatomical issue in one spot, you'll spot it elsewhere, and sometimes it'll be the same issue, and in this case, that is the case. Lots of great detail in this. I think this is a really, really great painting. Narrative-wise, I'd say there's a bit of a posing issue that could be pushed a little bit further with this. The crossed legs are a good idea. They're not feeling natural, as we just described, but I would maybe get rid of the weight of her legs being spread as though the hips are resting on a ground surface, because she's not. She's floating in the air. So you can help sell that effect, that illusion, by maybe making it so that her knees, one of her knees could be up like this, and she could still have a pointed toe, and maybe another one is just loose, and it implying the weightlessness of actually floating in the air can help. And I know that it's really hard to find reference for that, because obviously there isn't a lot of floating people in the world, but you can kind of extrapolate using logic to assemble the limbs in a way that sell the illusion even further. This is all like tertiary stuff, but all of that in aggregate makes for a really solid illustration. It's those little details that make a person go, huh, that's clever. I like that. Okay. Do the angle of ellipses on these scrolls in her bag kind of make them look like they're going through her hips? Yes, they do. It's not something I wanted to dig into too much, but yeah, basically, when you're okay, anytime you're drawing or dressing a figure, you need to draw through the figure. So when you're first drawing this figure out, and you're figuring out her torso and her hips, right? See how like the legs aren't sitting right there? Maybe this one's up higher. Okay. That you want everything that you're drawing that's going to be a prop or a dressing to fit and make sure that it goes behind. It's not that it's not crossing through the thing. So it's a good idea to draw through just to make sure. The backpack, the scroll satchel, all of these are not sitting on her. If she's really in like this backpack needs to be sitting at more of an angle because she's leaning forward. You see? The way it's sitting right now, it looks like part of the backpack is kind of digging into her flesh. It's that classic. I think I've mentioned this before. It's like the riding the horse illusion. You see this all the time with illustrations and the students that are learning how to draw. They'll draw their horse. So I'm just going to draw a real quick. I'm not doing a horse drawing here. It's more of a dog. It's just Kova. Okay, I'm drawing Kova. Shut up. Don't judge me. Okay, so when you draw a rider that's riding on Kova, this happens all the time. You'll see people draw the person, and then their legs come out the side of the hips, right? And then there's a head right here. Yay, we're riding the shark pig. Good times. The problem is that the crotch and rib cage intersection is totally broken. She would have no spine. You'd be sitting inside the spine. And that kind of thinking, it just happens. You think about the symbol of that thing, the symbol of the backpack, the symbol of the horse or the shark pig, and how the saddle sits in it. These things must always sit on the surface of that thing. And it's so easy to lose the surface and the volumetrics of a figure's form when you're doing the drawing or you go straight to paint. You can lose that really easily. Got to be constantly mindful of that three-dimensionality so that things sit against the form or drape on the form and don't collide inside the form. Everybody with me? Okay. I think that covers this. Again, excellent. I'm so happy with you guys. You're doing so good. All right, let's close this. All right, Christina's up next. Let's see. She says, one thing, I think I mentioned this before, watch the size of your images. I think this thing was 6,000 pixels. I don't need a 6,000 pixel image. 3,000 max, truly. 3,000 on the largest side, and I'll get everything I need to see. This one actually took a few seconds to load. All right. This is your submission. Out of comfort zone. True. Try to challenge in terms of composition, storytelling, and lighting. Always good. Satisfied with the result, but could be pushed much more. Okay. There could be more depth, movement, and energy. I'm going to do a second overpaint. Okay, cool. All right, well, let's do this so that we can think about it in terms of how to best use what you've got and do a secondary painting. So I'm assuming that this was constructed in Blender, correct? Welcome to Mage. Okay, yes. So you're running into a specific problem that I've noticed that I'm having with it too, which is that essentially when you are working with a 3D program, because everything is there in real space, it's very easy to forget about compositional elements because it's all there. It's all real, technically speaking, right? It's like taking a photo. You can take a photo and a person will be in the photo in any pose and it'll look all right. Things will look correct because it's real. We have the same issue here with this. This looks like a photo rather than a composition because there are some major compositional overlaps. The painting is feeling really good. It's the staging and placement. Right now you have, let's take a look, major tangencies right here. This is really hard. That's hard. Major tangencies. So if when you're staging your shot and you're picking out where the camera's going to be with your 3D program, you got to think about it like the final painting. Like what you're seeing is going to be the final painting. And I've done this numerous times just in the last couple of weeks because I'm trying to use Blender in my pipeline too. And the impulse to just say, okay, I've framed the things that I want to see and they're all in the shot correctly is strong. It's just because it's there. It's so different than painting where you have to make everything whole cloth, like from scratch. There's something there to start with, and it's so easy to just leave it that way. So the biggest things I would do is separate the ship from the figures. The figures are pretty dynamic, but this background ship is clashing with them really badly. It's hard to tell what's going on outside of you have a really good, strong focal point. The lighting is great. As a sailor, this sail makes me sad. We're gonna have to do something about that. That sail needs to be billowing and full of wind. Right now, it's just a flat plane. That looks like that was from Blender. So you can't just render the Blender thing. You gotta, if the scene is dynamic, everything in the scene must also be dynamic because there's motion, there's movement, right? So this sail should be billowing, and I think ignoring this for right now, let's say that this sail is full of air. The wind is pushing it out, right? Square sails. You have this unique opportunity to paint the top planes of the sail, which would kind of create another framing device. I would personally make this, I would turn it first of all, because that's kind of how the sails must work. The wind would be pushing it a little bit from the side, from the windward side on this direction. And then I would use the top end of that to create like a little sort of stop point, because you have all of these elements that are pushing the viewer out of the shot. All of them here. This is another kind of, god damn it. So you've got one here, the rope and arm pushing out. He's looking out of shot. He's pointing out of shot. This is going out of shot. Now, you don't have to have everything in a painting pointing directly back into the painting. That's not the point here. That's not how life works. That's not how anything works. Things can come out of the composition. It's just that's not the point. The point is that you can control where you draw attention to those lines that kind of point out. So this one makes some sense because it's actually foreground. It's quite dark, but these could be all dimmed out with atmosphere. I would change the boat direction entirely just so that you're not having this crossover. I would probably bring it down so that the nose, the bow of the boat's over here, or I would bring it up and over so it's out like this, and then it's a deeper perspective kind of looming behind them. Just ideas for that. But these other elements, they don't need to be going out like that. This one here, it can be blocked by a sail, like maybe their sail, if they're sailing also, is coming into the shot and blocking in like this. You know, you have all these opportunities to create more dynamicism with non-on-screen elements that can really help sell the drama of the scene by punching up the angles and punching up the cuts of what we can see in the composition. You could have, barrels tipping in the foreground. There's ways that you can carve this up and make it feel like there's even more action happening. Does that make sense? You have upset the captain. I like it. I'm very upset. This is This is sailing. This is serious business. This isn't just margaritas and putting your feet in the sand. That's mostly what it is. I'm not going to lie. All right. In terms of painting, the painting itself, it's quite strong. I think pretty successful stuff here. Good use of the... It looks like you've got a little bit of photo action in here, and they look pretty well seated. You're definitely getting better at that. Good textures. They're a little bit... The textures that were on the model itself are a little bit aliased, but I mean, if you don't give me a 6,000 pixel image, it's going to be a lot harder for me to see those subtle details. So, another reason, right? I'd say the bloom effect is maybe... Nah, you know what? I'd say you did fine with the bloom effect. That's working. If this object here is meant to be part of their boat, the values are too much like the distant boat. If it's part of the distant boat, it's not making sense where it's coming out. I would venture that you could probably get rid of this thing altogether. And then you have, if you allow the bloom to continue, or if you move this ship like I'm talking about and actually make this a big dark looming shape behind them, which is also this would be really terrifying. I mean, the other one's already scary, but having a boat come up on you like this is nightmare shit. It happened to me only once. I was doing an overnight passage across the sea to La Paz from Mazatlan, and it was late night. It was me and another boat, and we were each taking turns, one sleeping and the other one watching. The one sleeping would have autopilot on, so you would have to pay attention to your radar because it's pitch black outside. There was no light, and I remember I was on watch, and in the distance I could see like these little specks, these little lights, little tiny lights. And so I was like, huh, okay. So I kept an eye on it for a little bit, then kind of looked away. I think I was listening to an audiobook or something like that. Looked back up like 5 minutes later, and boom, this thing was right on top of us. Like the difference, it was a tanker or something, but the difference in speed between like 20 knots and 7 knots is massive. I mean, 7 knots is like, that's like going for a light jog, maybe a brisk walk. Like we were talking about a massive difference in speed. So I had to clamber over to the radio and call it out. It was so crazy. Yeah, big ships coming at you when you're a little ship is not a fun feeling. I was a bad captain that night because I wasn't paying attention. I was too busy with my Stephen King. Stephen King almost killed me. Send that to him. Let him know. So this is kind of where the 3D difficulties come into place. And again, I know now really how this works. You spend so much time making that model. The ship looks super cool. You want to show off as many details of it. You don't want to end up using it just as a graphic element so that you can actually show your figures. I totally get it. You see this also with illustrators that are doing copy for articles. So like articles in a magazine or on a web page, the graphic designer is using your art just as an asset. They don't really care that much about showing the entirety of, this little bit of texture that you have over here. That's not important. What's important is framing the entire article. So they're going to cut it up, or they'll crop, or they'll do things so that it looks cool as an entirety. You got to approach your assets the same way. Don't be beholden to your assets. Make them work for you rather than you working for them. Does that make sense? Irina suggests not having both figures parallel. They look too similar in pose. Yeah, you could definitely get away with maybe having this guy standing at the tiller. I think that's a good point. Having both of them have their arms up like that. Maybe if he's back here and he's holding onto the tiller for dear life, and we see, his legs are spread and he's being really dynamic. And that line, you know, that line carries up like this. Then you have two nice lines that kind of pointing like that. You can even have him looking in that direction, but having them both point might be, having them both point and having them both in a similar pose is a rhythm you don't need to have. That's a very good call, Irina. Thank you. And I think with that, I would even, is the verticality of this meant to be because it's for a book or something like that? Quick question. Okay, yeah. I think one of the things that you could do, because overall it feels a little bit cramped. Let's turn off what I've done. It feels a little bit cramped. But I really like the central part of the figure. Maybe if you made the bigger boat behind it just a little bit smaller, like make it higher in the waves and a little bit smaller, so it's not smaller in literal size for relative size rather, but smaller in terms of just a little bit distant. Maybe that would help with the cramping. Either that or I would go really graphic with this side and make it really just a super overexposed shot so that they kind of have more room to breathe. Also the sky, if this is meant to be kind of a storm, the sky could be a lot more gray, which would give you more opportunities to let that light, all these light aspects, the rim light, pop them off of the background. If that makes sense. Cool. Any big questions? Overall, I really like this. You guys you're so good. You're all making me so happy. I've seen such great improvement over the years with you guys. I'm so proud of you. Really good. Great hands. This looks so much more figured out and more in place than just the kind of more rubber looking ones that come with the DAS models. Very nice. Yeah, the photos worked. Let's see, for your water, where we're at, the way you've lit it, I'd say we're not going to see much in the terms in regard to waves down here. It's all going to be pretty bright. What you could do is hit the spume, if that's the word, I think, maybe with a little bit more. You have this really strong light source, and yet the water doesn't have much on it. So you could hit foam, get the you could even have light coming through the foam, so you know, bust up the saturation, and then you would have, you know, foam that we could see through, and then a top side to it. And then the other thing that you can do is add speculars to your water itself. Although speculars on water tend to make it look smoother, and that's probably not what we're going for here. So I would say pick up some reference of that specifically, trying to see if you can find water that's being lit in a similar lighting situation that is also as rough. And then of course, it's a materials thing and also a knowledge thing. If you're in water this rough, there is no way these guys are dry. No way. That boat should be soaking wet. There should be water in the boat. There should be water flying over the side of the boat. Like you could easily have, let's grab, you know, these colors. You could easily have implied splash coming over the side. And then you can light that too, and then have that point at our guy. You see what I'm saying? Absolutely, this guy would be soaked. So I would, if you really want to sell the danger of the scene, I would go in and you know, instead of having their hair big and fluffy and full, I would have it matted and sticking to their faces. You know, water in their eyelashes they can't see. Like that's gonna really sell the drama of it. You know, put in your speculars everywhere to imply that he's soggy. You know. And then, of course, you know, you're going to have to add the speculars to the cool side, too, because now he's ultra reflective. And it doesn't take much. You don't want to overdo it. Remember that with speculars, often less is more, and it's going to be about just picking up and hinting at the speculars in places where you have your focal point, and then just letting them kind of fall off a little bit. You'll still have them, but let them not be as dominant as you get further away from it. Okay. Absolutely, you can use the water to create more a dynamic image with in terms of your composition. Like anything that's in your shot and anything that would be in the world that's not in your shot is fair game. You know, don't throw in a bunny or something like that. But water, in this case, makes absolute sense to have water be a huge part of this. To have rain or a storm or something like that, cloud shapes. There, you can pull from anything here that would help sell whatever it is you're after. That being said, as I already mentioned, this is already a cramped composition, and a lot of that is tangency, but in general, it's also just a cramped composition. It's very narrow. There's a lot of stuff going on. So what I would do in terms of using water to accentuate your composition is I would use it to actually get rid of some details. I would use it to create graphic shapes so that, you know, the water could just be a wall right here. And that's what they're actually surfing on, is this big wall. And then you have your boat, right? And they of course overlap on top of that. But using these elements to simplify rather than to make it more complex might be the way to go for you as you take this into the next phase. Izzy paints the best speculars. Thanks, Dan Roth. I like painting speculars because they're the easiest thing to paint. Really, truly, painting matte surfaces with nice smooth undulation of color. Oh my god, what a pain in the butt. Just throw in some speculars. Make it shiny and creepy. It's always the best. All right. Cool. Any other questions, anybody? We feeling pretty square on this one? This is an aside, stylistic one, but I'm noticing it because I just happened to do it this time. But a cool, fun illustration technique, and I know I've shown it before, but it's fun to just talk about, is to use saturated color to do line work with, and then painting on top of that with while allowing some of that saturated line work to poke through. It's such a cool stylistic thing. I've actually forgotten that I used to do it a lot more, and I don't do it that much anymore. But now that I'm seeing it, I kind of miss it. There might be something to that. With something like this, where you have a very strong photorealism aspect, maybe something a little bit stylized might help. And that might be just the thing. It's something like line work or something that kind of just makes it pop a little bit more. So it's not just a photo. I'm thinking... God, I'm trying to remember the name of that illustrator. He did all these great pirate paintings. Not Pyle. Was it Pyle? Oh, I can't remember. I'm so bad with names, guys. I'm sorry. But if you look up old school illustrator and pirate paintings, especially like, I think if you look up monochromatic pirate paintings, you'll see how this guy did some amazing realistic looking studies, but also like injected him with so much style using color and line work like this. Looking at the chest and leg could be improved on the front guy. Let's take a look. Yeah, I think it's true. It's a nitpicky, but I think the problem is the photo over the model stuff. It's just the insertion where the hips are. You want to make sure that the legs come out from where the hips are. I think that's the big one. Always use elements to cheat. Just don't always hide your hands and feet, because that's obvious at this point. Everybody knows what you're doing then. If water's splashing over his hands and his feet, yeah, we know what you're doing. Cool. All right, nice job. Again, really great work. Let's close this out. All right, we've got Cave Matty, another magic card. Very cool. Izzy, here's my piece for the month. He wants to do the bucket list of doing magic cards. Totally understandable. This is based on an old magic card. I actually remember this one. That was one that came out when I played. Looking for critique with that in mind of getting an MTG gig. Kept the composition similar to the original card. Made it more modern. Made them cute. Okay. Cool. Not any specific questions so much, but that's all right. This is excellent. Flipping. What we have here is a really great example. Whoops. Sorry, guys. I keep pressing the wrong button. We have a great example of framing by taking atmosphere and pushing one element way back. This is what I was talking about. It's very important in magic cards because the cards end up only being like 1.5 inches or 2 inches, the illustration. It's very small. So you need to have a really good graphic read from like step one. And I think this one's pulling that off pretty well. It's a good graphic read. It's automatically got some dynamic angle to it. I think that is like the original. Cool characters. The lighting's feeling really good and accurate. Nice subtlety. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see this as a card. I think so. First thing of note is as you're working. I don't know if Maddie's with us right now, but you can watch it on the YouTube later, bud. But the first thing that I'm noticing as I see this, even though there's all the lighting information and the color feels really good, there is one thing that's standing out, and that is your brush size is uniform almost throughout. You need to vary up your brush size. Start big and then go to small, big to small. And I would actually even, I know it's kind of a stylistic thing to, and a special challenge to just roll with basically just a round brush. But it's a good idea when you're doing it for illustrative purposes to kind of push it, maybe change the brush shape or the tip a little bit. Even if you were to take a round and just flatten it, like just by 25%, that's going to create a little bit of visual difference in how you attack your strokes to create variety. I think that's really the only thing that's standing out to me like right away. It's just that it's creating banding, which you don't want too much of. In the edges like this, that's totally fine. But when you see banding on front surfaces, it gets a little bit kitschy looking, but quite nice. Great fill light action going on here. Their skin feels really smooth. I'd say if anything, it's actually working against them. They're supposed to be gobbies, which are supposed to be a little cartoonishly ugly. I would take it a little further and give them a little more texture myself. But I like the animation feel to it. I think it's really cool. And the good rich shadow colors and everything are helping with that quite a bit. Like it feels stylistic. The metal here is fantastic. I really like how that came out. Good color variation, nice and vibrant. Some questions? Yeah, amazing. Oh, missed it. Night, Irina. Sorry about that. Thought I did the paint over already. Yeah, I do Twitch on stream every Wednesday. I do one session per month will be crits for my patrons, and that's what we're doing today. Is we're looking at my badass patrons' paintings here. Yeah, I mean honestly, this would just be nitpick stuff. I really think this is solid on its own. You could probably get away with. You did such an excellent job on the rendering of the sled and the metals there, even the wood, although a little bit stripy because of the brush size being small universally. Not a huge deal, but this is so lovingly rendered that some of the other parts could really benefit from that same level of attention. And I think things like their hands, a little bit on the faces would benefit just a little bit from getting some of that modeled cool detail of varying up your hues, varying up your saturation just a little bit, and creating the textures on the face that help sell that. Oh, Christina left. Sorry. There is confusion here. I see what's happening, but when we're talking about a card that's reading at this size, you really want to make sure that it reads at the size that we see over here. So this is probably a good, our navigator is a pretty good indicator of what things will look like on a card size, and I use it that way all the time. When I'm painting, I'll look at my navigator because it'll show me roughly what it would look like in print. Obviously, the colors will be deadened a bit and the values will be deadened a bit, but you get the overall composition. This part is lost in that shot. I would either move his hand so that his hand is holding on to something up here. Maybe there's two chains, or I would have his hand somewhere else on this goblin to imply that he's holding on to him for support. Just these details as they are and the rhythm as it is, they're too similar, and they're creating a pattern rather than individual items. Like the ring, that's a little fun detail. Yeah, your impulse to put in these cool details is really good for a magic card. I think that this would probably fly. It would just be about those tertiary details, just taking the focal point to the same level that you took the metal here. Either that or knock the metal back and then just take these a little bit further. One thing, I know it's animation style, but watch your eyes. They can feel, when you go to white for the whites of the eyes, it can feel really cartoony. Same thing with the teeth. Just knocking them back a little bit. Again, not much. I don't want to nitpick you because it's so good. You could probably get away with giving them even more real estate. So let's grab them, paste, and I'm actually going to drag them over so it's even a little more precarious. I think you would get kind of the same effect. Could probably even bring them up higher so that we see more of what they're going to be, the precipice that they're on. You see what I'm saying? This is just narrative, and this is super subjective, guys. I'm only nitpicking for subjective purposes at this point. Like this is a solid enough painting that I think you could probably that it would fly as a card. So do you see what I'm saying here? There's a little bit more drama. You could probably even get away with like really Dutch angling the hell out of that. Okay. See what that in exact opposite ways from the last painting we were looking at, it had kind of a cramped feeling because there was so much going on. With this one, it feels almost a little too open for the action that's happening. Like this feels like this would be like a shaky cam shot, like kind of up close. So I mean, again, subjective. There is no hard answer to this. I'm just saying, like, for me, if I were art directing this, I would probably say cut it in a little bit, make it, Dutch up the angle a little, make it look like they're really going fast. They're already good. They're bad out of hell here. Even faster. You see what I'm getting at there? Okay. Let's take a look at the questions. Boom bop. Yes, it's a great rendering style. This kind of more animation-y. It's a really cool look. It's unique. It's nice. You don't know when to break the frame. Well, that's actually a really good question. When to break the frame? Let me think how to explain that. The best way to think about breaking the frame is, first of all, nothing that is your focal point can come outside that frame. Like, anything that's going to lead to a focal point can't come outside the frame. So if you have a line from let's say our focal point is this foreground guy, which he kind of is in a way here. If you had this leg being cut off and you were trying to show off everything else, it would be kind of a loss. Same thing with the hand. These are kind of narrative elements that you need to show. But the back of that spear, we already know everything we need to know about this spear. All of the important business is on this end. So if it gets cut off, it's not a big deal. We definitely can't cut off the sled. That's the name of the card. That's the focal point of the card. Or not the focal, but the focus of the card. If they were if this were an assignment nowadays, they would say the focus of this card is these crazy goblins on their surfboard to hell. Like, that would be the focus. So you can't have any part of that really getting cropped out. I'd say the only time that you can do that with an assignment from Magic is if the object is so big that it's not possible to frame it entirely in your shot. Faces. You never want to put faces on an edge. If you can avoid it, even if it's a tertiary character, if you can have them in or have them all the way out is the best way to go. You can't, any half on a face will look a little bit like it's off. It'll look like a tangent and it will draw the eye to that spot. People will wonder why their face is cut off there. Hands, same thing. You don't want to cut any of these things off just in the middle if you can avoid it. Those are just soft rules, just to kind of give you a little primer on it. We could probably do an episode on compositional no-nos if you guys like. Just remind me on the Discord. Can I explain the saturated banding? Of course. So, the saturated banding is an illustration effect that takes something that happens with light and is just amping it up to the nth degree in order to create visual interest and a little bit of cool vibration. So when you look at a shadow, most of the time when you have, we've discussed, what's the word I'm looking for here? Simultaneous contrast in color and temperature, right? So it works the other way around too. When we're talking about simultaneous contrast in illustration, we're talking about using it to make a color seem like something it's not. But it happens in nature too, where we see colors and we see hues as a result of the colors and hues next to them. It's always in a relationship. So when you're outside and you're looking at a strong cast shadow, especially something where the shadow is being lit by, let's say, the sun, and the cast shadow is from a statue or something like that, and the edges are soft, you have a nice cool fill light. The cool fill light is going to create kind of a bluish cast to that shadow, sometimes really blue. And then where the sun is at, that edge of the shadow is creating kind of an in-between in those two colors of that lit surface. And that in-between can sometimes seem like it's much more saturated than it is. So what we do is it's an old illustration technique, is to take all of those softened shadows and pump up the saturation in them. We do this also in our form shadows, and he's doing it a little bit here. You can see in some of the form shadows. Anytime you have a shadow that's softening, you have this kind of illustrative opportunity to throw in some of the base color that's just a little bit richer. it's also a result of subsurface scattering. So subsurface scattering is always sexy. Doesn't matter what the hell it's put on. It just looks cool. And so when you have a cast light, let's say the light's coming from above, and I'm blocking that light source with something, and there's a cast shadow, right? Well, the light is going to hit my skin and not hit where the shadow's hitting, but inside the skin, it bounces around inside, back and forth, right? And that light will emit just a little bit through the skin. Remember, any object that's lit becomes a light source itself, always. So that object being lit here, and not always, there are a few cases, but for explanation's sake, always. But it hits the skin, bounces around, and so that shadow edge where the light is able to emit just a little bit through the skin is going to create greater saturation. So between those two kind of natural effects, you can make a stylistic decision to apply that to any shadows, and it can make it look really rich and vibrant, which is exactly what's going on here. If you look at any of the rim or any soft transition of a shadow on his painting, you can see that he's done a saturated version of that color. See it here? Here. This is something that you see quite frequently in the form shadow. That happens much more naturally because with the form shadow, you're going to see as it hit, right before it hits the terminator on the light side, the darkest part of the light side, right before it hits the terminator, you're going to get the subsurface scattering that I was talking about, and also you're going to see the most saturated of the base color that you can see, because anytime something is lit, that base color mixes with the color of the light source, which creates a more desaturated color, always. So anything that's lit is going to be less saturated than the near terminator shadow side of that same object. So it should become more saturated no matter what. To choose to make it warmer or cooler, that's a little bit more stylistic. It should always be the most saturated that base color can be. That's like lessons 2 and 3, I think, going way back. Okay. Is it because the ground is rich in color? I think I've explained that. Does that make sense what I'm talking about in terms of the ground? It's not necessarily the ground itself. It's more of a stylistic thing. No, you, Lofi. You always thought it was because midtones hold the most saturation. Yeah, you're not wrong there. You're correct. It's and it's the darkest part of the midtone that's going to have the most saturation. Discounting variety in base color, like the rosiness of cheeks versus the more yellowy, callowy colors of colors of like bone near the surface. So base color, in terms of base color, the most saturated part will be on the cusp of the shadow. There's some missed opportunities for subsurface scattering. All minor stuff. Honestly, like I said, it's good. Very fun. I would just punch up those tertiary details a little bit. Great job. Any other specific questions, gang? Yeah, thanks for joining us, Sergio. Rest up. We'll see you next week. Okay. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to close this one. Great job, Maddie. We'll go to, oops, where we go here. Now there's Dan's. This is also kind of a magic card. Look at you guys go. That kicks ass. Oh, you're in for it, buddy. Hoping to get some feedback on this piece. In your head, it seems cool, and even on paper, it feels awesome. Yet somehow the piece isn't turning the wow notification. I already made an update. Still lacking something. Well, let's take a look and see what we can do. Firstly, the fire effect being blurred out like that looks great. That's really cool. It's very effective. Excuse me, I'm so burpy right now, and all I've had is coffee today. Let's see. So basically the narrative I'm picking up, I think it's pretty clear. It's sort of like a Lich King character, a Lich Knight and he's taken over the mind of this dragon and is piloting him like some kind of fleshy mig. Okay. Am I on with that? On point? What could we do? I'd say, let's see. I think in terms of the choosing a dominant and supportive color, this is a good complement style painting. The blues in there are strong, but they're very small. And I think I didn't really mention this so much with the first magic piece, that it doesn't necessarily have to be a play of a desaturated version of one of those colors and a saturated version. The other way that you can play that is straight up volume. And here, they're both roughly equally saturated, but the volume difference makes it so that it feels more harmonious, that there is a balance. So the blues are tiny and detailed and small. They're taking up very little volume. The oranges are taking up the vast majority of the painting, and that balance feels like it works. So something to keep in mind. Sort of a Game of Thrones guy. Repaint of an older piece. Okay. I'd say kind of one of the things that's jumping out is all of the lost potential for showing us more of these characters on the top side. I think you could get away with adding a bit of a sky. If not a sky, maybe making this a blue light source or something like that, and then you could do things like lighting the top of the forms just a little bit. Again, notice that I'm not trying to do full lighting, just a rim lighting to kind of create the implication of the roundness of form. What you have here in regard to the primary light source, which is the fire, is kind of a chiaroscuro painting where the darks and shadows just go directly into a matte black distance. And it's a cool effect, but it might not give you what you're after. I think you might have a better result by including a secondary light source. So it could either be him or it could be the sky itself, just so that you can have these cool little moments where you can kind of imply the detail up here. Let's say there's a horn there or something, right? And you wouldn't need to do much. You could maybe make it raining. Rain is always a cool thing, especially if you have a really bright in shot effect. So these aren't that bright. We can pump that up even more. And let's say maybe give just a little bit more brightness. I fucked that part up. Then if you had something like rain, a rain effect, you could do, let's just do kind of a quick we're totally cheating here, but it's for the point of speed. Oops. Now we don't want to see all of these, so we can go in. Actually, I should use a softer brush since we're just going straight. Whoa, that's not the brush. Those are leftover brushes from back in the day when I didn't have perspective tools like Blender. So I just made brushes that were straight up, like 1 point and 2 point and 3 point perspective brushes. Let's say we get rid of everything that's kind of in front of details that we want to see. Switching to my brush, locking the pixels on that, and I'm going to change the color of those drops that are inside the the fire area being lit by the orange of the fire. I'm going to let them be orangey. And then these blue ones, maybe they're hit by that light. Then we can do things like grabbing that same shot. Let's shrink it. And then what it does is it gives you a false atmosphere because we don't have clouds or anything that we're working with. But it would just be something to give it a little bit of drama or a little, you know, a little extra. And you can just keep pumping that up and doing, let's say, let's grab all of these. I think this might work. It might not. Let's check. Let's group them. We're going to make a new layer and clip to that group. Set it to color dodge. Yeah, they're just not, they're not opaque enough. I made the brush strokes way too light. So we'll just have to ignore that, make a new layer, and we'll just draw in stronger. So those that are streaking in front of the light sources are picking up a little bit of that light. And that can be kind of a cool effect. Same thing up here. See how cheap and cheesy, but it works. And then of course you would do like little drops and things like that where, and these are just little ways, because the painting is finished, it's good. It's just about like giving it that little extra oomph that helps kind of finish it up, that last bit of tertiary and quaternary details. Again, I mean, obviously, if you don't want to add rain, then this effect doesn't work. But you can do different things. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. It's just that be brave. If there's something that's not working in your image and you can narrow it down to something like, okay, I don't have enough light on one side. Think of creative ways to solve for that. Does that make sense? Is Blender a better way to go for perspective? Yes and no. I mean, kind of. The problem with Blender is the one that I've mentioned already, is that it's so easy to get locked into what's on camera and lose throwing your design senses at it, like your sensibilities rather. Because it's real, quote unquote, you get stuck in it. So it can be good for really complicated things, but I have found that if you're only dependent on that, it can sometimes stifle you. So use it as a tool with those sort of issues in mind, and it would be fine. It'll work great. If anything, if you're struggling with just the basics of perspective, pick up those books like we've talked about. Study from the books to get good enough understanding of perspective that you can kind of fake it. Guessperspective will get you really far, especially if you're doing mostly figurative stuff, kind of like what we're doing right now. Most of these images aren't really perspective heavy, even though they do have really strong perspective shots, like all of these really deep three-point perspectives. Understanding the three-point perspective and how things should behave will get you really far. Actually drawing them out, that's going to be the best way to learn. But if you're in a pinch and you need it done quick, Blender's a great way to do it. So it's a great tool. I would just say use it as a tool on top of good perspective understanding rather than as replacement for it. Does that make sense? Any advice on speculars pre-rain? Yeah, we can totally get rid of the rain. That's not. So basically what you're going to need with your speculars is just to, well, you can approach it in terms of the speculars that are coming from our light source, or you can approach it in terms of speculars that are coming from a new light source that we're going to include. If we're talking about the ones up close, your struggle is that you have lighting from, you have light that's coming from everywhere. So you have basically a big field of light here, and so how do you get a specular from that? Well, to be frank, it's really hard, and I wouldn't recommend doing it. So, what I would say is instead, when you're working with a big field or a volume of light like this that needs to create speculars on a material, pick one part of that to be your point light. So, I would say, pick something like this. Okay, that's my point light now. Even though logically there should be speculars coming from everywhere, this is too much to map. It's just going to be exhausting to paint. It'll look inaccurate no matter what you do. So pick something and simplify. Err on the side of simplicity and then do your speculars from that. So with that in mind, then we can map out our speculars knowing that one, they need to be very warm because this is a very low exposed image and the light that's coming from the fire is the brightest thing, and fire is not that bright, as we've established numerous times. So what you would do is try and find good hard edges, not all edges. Remember, think of when you're doing speculars on an object that is meant to be shiny, but has lots of shiny element details like these scales, right? Like a snake, is to think about it as though those other textures weren't there. Ignore the scales first and think about just the greater form. If this was just one big block shape like this, right? That's all it is. It's just the one block shape. There's no surface texture. There's no normals on it at all. So we have to ignore that and think about the parts of that block shape that are going to be picking up the light the most. Then, once you know where those are, those points where they're going to be picking up the speculars, then you do your speculars as if you were totally ignoring the scales. They would be in that spot, right? All one big grouping. Sometimes it's real big in one section because it's a little broader there, right? So you would group them like that. But then now, as you're drawing them in, think about how the scales arrange and would part those speculars. And that's it. It's very simple. You follow the big rules and then detail within the big rule. That's it. And then, of course, make sure that, as we've discussed, you're going to be not putting speculars everywhere. You only want to put them in places where the feature is going to be most effective. All this is missing is those tertiaries. Truly. It's pretty solid, and the downlighting, it feels really good and cinematic. It wouldn't take much. I would think about this like you would think about a film. Like it's you have to do a lot of fake lighting with this in order to show us the features. So you would have, like if this was a movie set, right? We would have a big sort of lamp up here above that would be giving us these dim top lights that are cooler, meant to simulate the moon. You would have, a lot of strong little reflectors down here and bright reds coming up. I would even probably have another light source coming from this direction because the dragon's face is important. But that even what I've just made is too bright, so I would kind of knock that back, and it would be real dim. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't take much to create three-dimensionality on a figure. It just takes more than one light source. 2 light sources minimum, really, but 3, that's a good sweet spot. 3 light sources, and then of course all of the reflected lights that occur as a result of those objects around your object lighting it. So it's going to probably be more like 7 or 8 light sources if you're really mapping them out. But if you're just mindful about how light's reflecting and the colors that are in the scene, you really don't need to map them out. You just need to be aware that these colors are available to me when I'm doing my fills and all that stuff. Does that make sense, gang? Yeah, we still managed even just with 5, what was that, 5, 6 pieces, 2 hours of talking. See what I mean? Like This is definitely more intensive. I think this is a better way to do the critting, but hopefully you guys understand the changes that I'm making for Patreon, and everyone is on board and feels good about it. So yeah. Again, if you guys have any questions, if you're a patron or if you're not, that's fine. This is a place to kind of have some dialogue about this stuff. So you guys can ask me anything, and we can talk about it in future lessons or on the spot on Twitch. Just want to make sure you guys had that available to you. So everybody's covered. I didn't miss any pieces. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Yes, this is way better than the text reviews. It's more engaging too, because then I can ask you guys things and find out what it is you were thinking or what it is you're trying to understand, and it makes it so much easier for me to explain it. So I think this is I'm so glad I have internet now and can do this stuff with you guys. This was totally impossible on the boat. So one of the upsides to moving off of the boat is being able to do this with you all and try and grow the community here. If you have any other questions and they pop up in your head later in the week, throw them up on the Discord. We'll discuss them there. We'll also plan out the next lesson, see if we're still interested in more narrative lighting. I think I covered most of the bases there, so it might be... I might look through the list and find something else. So if there's something that's really pressing on a piece that you need to be working on or something like that I can address for the next lesson, let me know in the Discord. I think that takes care of everything for today. I got to get back to freelance. I am drowning in freelance right now. So I'm going to get back to that, gang. It was fun hanging out. Thanks for joining me all. As always, paint smart, paint sexy.
Hi there. I'm Izzy, a professional writer, concept artist, and illustrator. I've taught painting for a dozen years or so, on and offline. Many of your favorite illustrators and designers have studied with me or under me and have gone on to teach in their own right. You're here because, like they did, you want to learn to paint realistically for illustration or concept art. Well, worry not. You're in the right place. Grab a seat. I want you to join me as I explain all the aspects of image making in extremely digestible and clear monthly lessons. Not through the lens of silly how to paint hair or eye demos. That shit is carnival tricks. And you're not really learning anything except an exact way to render one thing in one manner. This is painting mysticism at its worst. Watching these kinds of exploitative lessons won't help you level up with your understanding. Sure, now you can paint sparkly hair, but what if you want to paint a dragon, or figure out how to render a sea of fire, or depict a one-eyed transgender space marine dying in the vacuum of space? Painting and image making are tools of communication, and can be learned by anyone willing to put in some time. Like grammar is for language, light, color, and form literally follow a formula. Painting well is not a matter of chicken bones, zombie crackers, and the ever-dismissive concept of talent. Learning with my series, Izzy's Logic of Light and Color, will give you the tools and understanding so you can analyze light and form in reality and bring it to life in your work. Using this simple system I have distilled will help you harness your art to share your ideas as you've always intended. When we are children, we all draw in symbols. Symbols for our house, our hands, the sun, the grass, our pet lobster. As we grow into artists, we must learn to throw away symbols and begin to draw and paint what it is we actually see. And as we grow further, we learn to paint beyond what we see and what is actually there. Until finally we move beyond this and learn to trim away what is actually there so we voice only what we want. With me, you're going to have to buckle in and maybe take some pain meds, because I'm going to rip out your normal person's eyes and replace them with a painter's eyes. I'm going to restructure how you see and how you understand what you're seeing. I'm going to turn you into a painting machine. Truly, anyone can learn to paint realistically if they can both determine what they're seeing or imagining with basic and straightforward rules. Once you understand the mechanics of light, color, and form in reality, you will have the capacity to paint anything you can see or imagine realistically. After that, the real fun begins. Here are some of the ways you can join me and master the logic of light and color. The very first lesson of my series is totally free on my YouTube channel. In that lesson, I give you the 3 primary rules of light that are the very foundation of painting and understanding light itself. If you do nothing else to make your painting mastery easier, at least watch this amazing little lesson. It will do more for your basic understanding of light than just about any tutorial you can find. When you're ready to get deeper and you feel like you have those first rules figured out, allow me to utterly blow your mind with the next episodes available on Gumroad and ArtStation. As we go deeper into the rules underlying the logic of light and color, I carefully and simply explain important and interesting elements. From beginner to pro, there is an amazing amount of information available. Each concept has been distilled into the clearest explanation you're likely to find anywhere. Like episode 2, where we cover the atmospheric effect and how that relates to light, scale, and distance of objects in reality, and how to render it. Or episode 3, where I hand over the ultimate key to controlling value in your paintings. Episodes 5 through 8 are all about rendering materials. Want to understand the logic behind rendering metal, leather, hair, transparency, damn near anything. I even cover the logic behind painting special effects like fire, neon, or lightsabers in later episodes. The lessons just get deeper and more detailed as I build on the foundations covered in preceding episodes. The 10th gives you the most important rule of composition you'll ever learn to keep your images interesting. The next few episodes cover important painting techniques like my edge control ninjutsu or simplification with the large to small system. We dip a toe in color theory, devote a few episodes to finishing full-blown illustrations utilizing the techniques we've learned so far. Some episodes, like the lighting game or Advanced Exercises 1, the shirt, present cheap, valuable, and practical exercises to give you explosive growth in your development. Episodes 22 through 25 cover painting and illustration, just like I do for Magic the Gathering, from assignment and inception to signing the painting at the end. Each one is full of tips, knowledge, everything to make working as an illustrator easier. Did you enjoy learning how to paint basic materials? Metal, wood, and such? I got 3 whole episodes devoted to the intricate logic behind painting different kinds of skin. After that, more lessons devoted to pumping life into your portraits and original methods for accurately drawing faces out of your head. From fundamentals to photo bashing, Gumroad and ArtStation have every lesson I create available for purchase a la carte. But here's an even better way to learn with me. Stay current with my latest lessons on Patreon for the lowest price available. Monthly support gets my student that month's lesson, a critique or paint over of their finished work, a discount code for 25% off the entire Gumroad archive, and access to the Logic of Light and Color Discord community, where we plan future lessons, share knowledge, and learn together as a team. The absolute best method is to join my Patreon classroom at the Student Plus tier, where you'll get everything I just mentioned and a free episode from the archive every month to accelerate your mastery at your own pace. You've decided to take control of your painting and master Izzy's logic of light and color. Now it's up to you to choose the path that's best for you. I'll see you on the flip side. Paint smart, paint sexy.